thin down a little, so that the sweet essence inside you is not forgotten. I don't remember exactly when it happened. There was no single morning I woke up and decided to become someone harder. It was gradual, the way a river carves into stone. Not one dramatic strike, but 1,000 quiet ones, each small enough to go unnoticed, until one day you look and the landscape has completely changed. I was somewhere in my early 30s when a close friend, someone I'd known since we were barely 20, sat across from me at a dinner table and said, out of nowhere, "You used to laugh differently." I asked what she meant. She said, "Freer, you used to laugh like you weren't watching yourself." I didn't respond. I picked up my glass and changed the subject. But that sentence lived in me for months, turning over like a stone in a tumbler, wearing smooth against all my other thoughts. And slowly, I began to understand what she was pointing at, not just in the laugh, but in everything. Growing up, I was what people might kindly call sensitive. I felt things deeply and I showed it. I cried at movies before the sad part even arrived, because I could feel it coming. I got excited about small things, a particular slant of afternoon light, a song I hadn't heard in years playing through a stranger's window. I trusted people quickly, maybe too quickly. I loved loudly, in the way that only someone who hasn't yet been taught the cost of loving that way can. People around me, some well-meaning, some not, took note of this. "You're too emotional. Don't wear your heart on your sleeve. You need to toughen up." These were not cruel people, mostly. They were people who had already been through their own versions of what I was about to go through. They were, in their way, trying to spare me. And so I listened. I filed their advice away like something useful, something I might need later. I needed it sooner than I expected. The first real loss came when I was 24. A relationship I had poured myself into ended in a way that felt like standing in a room you'd carefully arranged for years, and someone just opened all the windows and let the wind take everything. I was not prepared for how physical grief could be, how it lived in your chest, how it made food tasteless, how it could ambush you in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when you were just trying to get through the day. And I remember thinking, I cannot feel this again. I cannot afford to. So I started building. Not walls exactly. I always thought that metaphor was too dramatic, too deliberate. What I built was more like padding, layer after layer of careful distance. I became very good at engaging with people just enough to be warm, enough to be liked, but not so much that their absence would leave a mark. I became very good at appearing present while actually being somewhere slightly behind myself, watching, assessing, calculating risk. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself it was wisdom. For a while, it looked like both. By my late 20s, I had built a life that looked, by most external measures, like a success. I was competent. I was composed. I handled difficult situations with what people called grace, though what they were actually seeing was detachment that had been polished until it shone like something intentional. I had a career I was proud of. I had friends, good ones, people who cared about me. I had a life full of forward motion, goals, plans, the comfort of knowing I was building toward something. But there was a quietness underneath all of it. Not peace, something more like absence, like a room where music used to play. I noticed it most in small, private moments. Reading a book that should have moved me and feeling almost nothing. Watching a sunset over the water and thinking, yes, that's beautiful, but in the way you might assess a painting in a gallery, appreciating it from outside the glass. Standing at a celebration, a wedding, a birthday, a reunion, surrounded by people I genuinely loved, and feeling a strange, low hum of distance between myself and all of it. I wasn't unhappy. That's the complicated part. I wasn't suffering. I had simply become very efficient at living. Efficient in the way that means you've stripped away everything that isn't strictly necessary, including some things that were. There was a period, around 32, 33, when I started noticing what I'd given up. It started with small things. A colleague at work, younger, still full of a certain unguarded enthusiasm, would pitch ideas in meetings with this undisguised excitement, this I believe in this energy that had no armor around it. And I would watch the room's subtle reactions, the slight smirks, the careful neutrality of people who have learned not to show too much, lest they be thought naive. And I would think, I used to be like that. And then, almost immediately, good thing I'm not anymore. But the thought that followed, The one that stayed was quieter and less comfortable, was it though? Was it really a good thing? The conversation that changed everything didn't happen with a therapist or in a journal or in any of the places people expect transformation to begin. It happened at 2 a.m. in my kitchen with someone I had started dating a few months earlier, someone who was, frustratingly, still soft in all the places I had learned to be hard. We'd had a disagreement about something I can no longer remember, something small and ordinary, and I had done what I had trained myself to do, become very calm, very measured, very adult about the whole thing. I spoke in full sentences. I acknowledged both perspectives. I was, by every practical standard, handling it perfectly. And they looked at me and said, "I don't know how to reach you." I said, "What do you mean?" "I'm right here." And they said, "No, you're performing being right here. It's not the same thing." I wanted to argue. I had all the arguments ready. But I looked at their face, not defensive, not angry, just honest in that particular way that only people who are not afraid of their own feelings can be honest. And something in me went very still. Because they were right. I was performing. I had been performing for so long that I had almost forgotten it was a performance. I had almost convinced myself that the composed, unruffled version of me was the real one, and that the person who used to cry before the sad part of the movie, the person who fell in love with light through windows and songs from strangers, that person was just a rough draft. But here's what I know now, from this far down the road. That person was not the rough draft. That person was the whole point. Thinning down doesn't happen overnight. I want to be honest about that, because I think we're often sold stories of transformation that are too clean, too quick, too conveniently complete. The truth is more uneven, more recursive. You make progress, and then you retreat. You have a week where you feel genuinely open, genuinely present, and then something happens, a disappointment, a betrayal, a moment of vulnerability that doesn't land the way you hoped, and you find yourself reaching for the old armor before you've even consciously decided to. I still do it sometimes. I can feel the exact moment I do it. A slight tensing, a pulling back, a shift into observer mode. A decade of practice doesn't just disappear because you've decided you don't want it anymore. But the difference now is that I notice it. And noticing it means I have a choice. There's a particular memory I keep coming back to. I was maybe 7 or 8, and my mother was making something in the kitchen. I don't remember what, and she was singing to herself. Not performing. Not even really aware of it, I don't think. Just singing the way people do when they're alone in a room and happy enough to let sound out of themselves without thinking about whether it's welcome. I stood in the doorway and watched her, and I remember thinking that she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Not because of how she looked, because of how fully she was there, in that kitchen, in that moment, in her own happiness, without any of the self-consciousness that the world was already beginning to teach me. I've thought about that image so many times over the years, tried to understand why it stayed with me. I think I know now. She was thin. Not in the way we usually mean, not diminished, not reduced. Thin in the way that means no extra material between herself and the world. No protective coating. Nothing between what she felt and what she showed. And I could feel it from the doorway. Her joy was contagious because it was real. Her realness was contagious because it was brave. This is the thing about the armor we build. It works both ways. Yes, it keeps the pain at a distance. But it keeps everything else at a distance too. Joy. Wonder. Connection. The particular electricity that moves between two people when they are both actually there, not performing being there, but fully, unguardedly present. I think of all the moments I processed from behind glass. The friends whose grief I acknowledged but didn't fully receive. The love I accepted but kept at arm's length, always maintaining just enough distance to remain safe. The beauty I noted but didn't let in. Not really, not all the way down. I don't think of this with regret, exactly. Regret implies the choices were wrong, and I'm not sure they were, not for who I was at the time and what I needed to survive. But I think of it with a kind of mourning. For the richness I filtered out in the process of filtering out pain. I am not a different person than I was at 24, standing in the wreckage of that first real loss and deciding, without fully deciding, to build something protective around myself. I am the same person, with more of the same material to work with, but I'm trying to use that material differently now. I'm trying to let things land. To not deflect a compliment with a self-deprecating joke before it can touch me. To not pivot to analysis when what's actually called for is just feeling. To let grief be grief, and not a problem to be managed. To let love be love, and not a transaction to be carefully balanced. This is harder than it sounds, especially at the age where the world has given you plenty of reasons to be careful. But I think about that kitchen. I think about my mother's voice. I think about the friend who told me I used to laugh differently. I think about the person who said, "You're performing being here," and who was kind enough to say it with love rather than accusation. And I think the sweetest parts of who I am were never the parts one protected. They were the parts one kept offering, in spite of everything. There is something I want to say about the people who stayed. Because here is what I've learned, late and slowly. The people who truly love you, not the ones who need something from you, not the ones who are entertained by you, but the ones who genuinely see you. They do not stay because of the armor. They stay in spite of it. And sometimes they stay because they caught a glimpse of what was underneath it. Just once, just briefly, and that glimpse was enough to make them patient with everything else. I have had a few of those people in my life. Maybe you have too. The ones who didn't leave when you were difficult, who didn't disappear when you were clumsy with your feelings, who didn't find someone easier when you were going through something that made you temporarily impossible to be around. Those people are not common. They are worth more than anything I spent my 30s accumulating. And I think about how close I came to losing some of them, not through any dramatic rupture, but through erosion, through being so consistently managed, so reliably composed, so expertly fine, that there was nothing left to hold on to, nothing real enough to attach to. You can't love a performance. Not for long. Not in the way that lasts. The intimacy I was so afraid of losing by being vulnerable, I was losing it anyway, by refusing to show up. That is not a comfortable thing to understand about yourself, but it is a true one. I've been thinking lately about what we pass on. Not materially, not money, not objects, but energetically. The shape of how we move through the world. The emotional vocabulary we model for the people around us. I think about the younger people in my life. Nieces, nephews, the children of friends. And I notice the ones who are still uninhibited, still loud with their feelings, still crying openly, still laughing without checking first whether it's okay to laugh that much. And I feel two things at once, a deep instinctive protectiveness, and something else, something more complicated, a kind of grief for what the world will eventually teach them, and a fierce, private wish that they could learn to be strong without learning to be closed. Because I've seen the other version play out too many times. I've watched careful, brilliant people shrink themselves into efficiency. I've watched the warmest people I know go quiet over years, not from sadness exactly, but from practice, the accumulated practice of not showing too much, not needing too much, not hoping out loud in case the hoping is overheard and somehow used against them. We learn this from each other. That's the thing nobody quite says. We learn it from watching the people ahead of us in line, observing how they navigate the world, what they reward and what they punish, what earns admiration and what earns pity. And if what we see consistently is that softness is punished and hardness is rewarded, we adapt. We are human. Adaptation is what we do. But adaptation is not destiny. That is what I keep having to remind myself. There was a year, I won't name it, but it was one of the harder ones, when I went through something that stripped away every layer I had built. Not because I chose it, but because the circumstances were such that I simply didn't have the resources to maintain the performance. I was depleted. I was raw. I was, for a stretch of months that felt much longer at the time, completely without the usual distance I kept between myself and everything. It was, in certain ways, the worst I had felt in years. It was also, in ways I didn't understand until much later, the most alive I had been in just as long. Because here is what happens when you stop protecting yourself and just are, when you are genuinely broken open and haven't yet figured out how to seal yourself back up. People reach you. Not all people, but the right ones. They find the opening and they walk in. And what they bring with them is something that the defended version of you would have analyzed from a distance and never actually felt. I received more real kindness in that year than in the 5 polished, composed years before it. That fact took me a long time to sit with, without wanting to rearrange it into something more convenient. I've also had to make peace with the fact that staying soft, genuinely, sustainably soft, is not a passive thing. It is not what happens when you stop trying. It requires attention. Because the default, at least for me, after everything the years have taught, is to seal, to tighten, to protect. Openness is not my resting state anymore if it ever was. It's a choice I make, sometimes moment to moment, sometimes against considerable internal resistance. And what I've found is that the moments when it feels most important to stay closed are usually, almost without exception, the moments when staying open matters most. When someone is telling me something hard, and my instinct is to move into problem-solving mode because feelings are uncomfortable, that is exactly the moment to stay. When something beautiful is happening, and I notice myself observing it rather than inhabiting it, that is exactly the moment to step closer. The discipline, if it can be called that, is not in becoming less careful. It's in noticing when the carefulness has curdled into avoidance, and choosing, each time, to let the wall come down a little. Just a little. Just enough. I don't know what the lesson is, exactly. I'm suspicious of clean lessons. Life tends to be more complicated than the tidy moral at the end of a story. But if I'm sitting here, turning this over honestly, I think it's something like this. There's a version of growing up that looks like getting stronger, but is actually getting smaller. Where the things that made you, your softness, your wonder, your willingness to be moved, get shed one by one in the name of resilience, until you look down one day and realize you've been so busy protecting yourself from being hurt that you've accidentally protected yourself from being alive. And there's another version, slower maybe, less defended, more willing to bleed. A version where you carry everything you've learned from all the hardest things, but you carry it without letting it calcify, without letting the scar tissue spread until it covers the parts that still know how to be tender. That second version is what I'm trying to live, not without scars, not without knowledge, not naive, not untouched by what the years have taught, just thin enough that the good stuff can still get through, just open enough that the sweetness hasn't been forgotten. My mother still sings in the kitchen sometimes. I know because I've heard her when I've come home, standing at the door the same way I did at 8 years old. And every time, I stay there a moment longer than I need to. Not analyzing it, not noting it from behind glass, just receiving it. That, I think, is where I'm trying to get back to. Not backwards, forward, but carrying the best parts of what I was before the world taught me to protect them so carefully that I almost lost them entirely. Thin down a little. Let the light back in. The sweetest version of you is not the one who survived everything untouched. It's the one who was touched, fully, genuinely, all the way down, and kept going anyway.